she dumped me with, but we can still be close, right? I said, totally. 6 weeks later, she found out close didn't include lending money for vacations, playing relationship counselor, or dog sitting anymore, particularly after her mother started asking why I was dating her coworker. The thing about breakups is they usually come with some warning, some gradual decline you can track if you're paying attention, but Gabriella delivered hers like a TED Talk she'd rehearsed in the mirror, complete with hand gestures and strategic pauses for emotional impact. I got home from the garage around 7 on a Tuesday, covered in diesel residue and eager for a shower, when I found her sitting at our kitchen table with this expression I'd never seen before, something between determination and rehearsed sympathy. The condo smelled like the vanilla candles she always lit when she wanted to create an atmosphere, and I knew immediately something was wrong because Gabriella only set moods when she needed something or was about to deliver bad news. I'd been with her for 3 years, living together for the last 18 months in this Tampa condo that cost way more than it should, splitting expenses in a way that wasn't actually splitting at all since I covered about 85% of everything while she worked part-time at a boutique downtown and spent the rest of her hours planning her breakthrough as what she called a lifestyle curator. The garage I own specializes in diesel truck repairs, nothing glamorous but steady work that pays well, especially when snowbirds flood Florida and realize their RVs need serious attention before heading back north. Gabriella used to say she loved how hardworking I was, how reliable and solid, but somewhere in year 2 those compliments started sounding less like praise and more like she was describing a dependable appliance. I dropped my keys on the counter and immediately noticed she'd arranged everything perfectly, 2 glasses of wine already poured even though I hadn't agreed to whatever conversation she'd planned, her phone face down on the table in that deliberate way that meant she didn't want interruptions. She patted the chair across from her with this sad smile that didn't reach her eyes, and I sat down because what else was I going to do, and she took a deep breath like she was about to cliff dive into cold water. Marcus, we need to talk about us, about where we're heading and whether we're still aligned with our individual growth trajectories. Individual growth trajectories? Like we were corporations instead of people who'd spent 3 years building something together, or at least I thought we'd been building something together. I've been doing a lot of internal work lately, she continued, her voice taking on this therapeutic quality she'd picked up from whatever podcast was currently influencing her vocabulary, and I've realized that I've been compromising my authentic self to fit into a relationship structure that doesn't serve my evolution anymore. I just stared at her, trying to process what was happening, watching her perform this breakup like it was content she'd eventually post about, some inspiring story of a woman brave enough to choose herself. The thing is, you're an amazing person, she said, reaching across to touch my hand with this pitying gentleness that made my skin crawl, but I need to align with someone who understands my vision for my personal brand development, someone who can grow with me as I expand into the influencer space and build my platform. My personal brand development. This was the woman who'd posted 17 Instagram stories last week about her morning coffee routine and gotten 43 likes total, but she talked about her influencer career like she was negotiating with Netflix. You're breaking up with me because I don't understand your vision, I said flatly, pulling my hand back and reaching for the wine she'd poured, figuring if I was getting dumped I might as well have something to drink. She looked almost relieved that I'd said it directly, like she'd been worried she'd have to spell it out more clearly, and nodded with this solemn expression. I think we want different things from life, Marcus. You're focused on your garage and your trucks and building something traditional, while I'm trying to create a lifestyle that inspires others and generates passive income through authentic content creation. Authentic content creation. Last month she'd asked me to stage a surprise date night so she could film my reaction for her followers, except she'd made me redo it 6 times because the lighting wasn't right and I wasn't smiling enthusiastically enough. But here's the thing, she leaned forward with sudden intensity, her eyes getting that calculated look that meant she was about to ask for something. I don't want to lose you completely from my life because we have such a deep connection and you've been such an important part of my journey. I want us to stay close, to still be there for each other, just in a different capacity that allows us both to grow. Stay close, I repeated, watching her face carefully, trying to understand what she actually meant beneath all the self-help language. Exactly, she smiled like I'd finally understood the lesson. We can still talk and support each other and be important people in each other's lives, just without the limitations of a romantic relationship holding us back from our potential. The thing about Gabriella was she'd always been good at framing her selfishness as some kind of spiritual enlightenment, making her desires sound like universal truths rather than personal preferences. I sat there looking at this woman I'd spent 3 years with, this person I'd covered rent for and grocery bills and utilities for while she invested in her future and bought ring lights and backdrop stands for her content creation, and I realized she wasn't actually ending our relationship because she wanted freedom. She was repositioning me from boyfriend to resource, keeping me available for all the practical benefits I provided while removing any obligation she had to consider my needs or feelings. The lease on this place runs through September, I said, keeping my voice neutral and businesslike, which is 4 more months. How do you want to handle that? Oh, she waved her hand dismissively. I figured we'd just keep living here like we have been until the lease is up. It's not like anything has to change immediately just because we're not romantically involved anymore. Right, I said slowly, so you want to break up with me but continue living together and splitting expenses the way we currently do? Well, she shifted uncomfortably. Obviously we'd both still need to contribute to the household. I can't afford this place on my own, and I'm sure you don't want the hassle of finding somewhere else mid-lease. There it was, the real reason for all the talk about staying close and maintaining our deep connection. She wanted to dump me but keep me paying most of her bills while she went out and dated other people. Our third roommate Isabelle, who rented the converted den for $600 a month and worked night shifts as an ER nurse, was probably in her room listening to this entire conversation through the thin walls and wondering what fresh drama she'd have to navigate. I can be close, I said finally, giving Gabriella the smile I used with customers who thought they could negotiate down my labor rates. Totally close, we'll stay super connected. Her whole face lit up with relief and something that looked almost like triumph, like she'd successfully managed a difficult conversation and gotten exactly what she wanted. Oh Marcus, I'm so glad you understand. She reached across the table again to squeeze my hand. This is why you're such a special person, you really get it. I get it, I agreed, taking a long drink of wine and planning my next move. I absolutely get it. What Gabriella didn't understand yet was that I got it better than she realized. I understood exactly what she was trying to do and I was going to give her precisely what she'd asked for. We were going to be close in the most literal, unhelpful way possible. The next morning I started packing, not dramatically or angrily, just methodically sorting through my belongings while Gabriella was at the boutique doing whatever it was she did there besides take photos of herself next to expensive handbags. I called a buddy who managed a complex across town and asked about availability, got lucky with a studio that had just opened up after a tenant transferred for work, put down a deposit over the phone and scheduled the move-in inspection for Friday. 3 days from now I'd be completely out, taking my 85% contribution to the household expenses with me and leaving Gabriella to figure out reality without a safety net. Isabelle emerged from her room around 2 in the afternoon, still in her scrubs from the overnight shift, looking exhausted but curious when she saw the boxes I'd assembled. You're actually moving out, she said, not quite a question, more like confirmation of something she'd suspected. Lease allows either party to terminate with proper notice and payment of contractual obligations, I said, folding a stack of work shirts into a box. I'm covering my portion through the end of this billing cycle, after that I'm done. Isabelle leaned against the doorframe with this expression that was half impressed and half concerned, studying me like I was a patient with unexpected symptoms. She's going to lose it when she realizes you're serious, you know that right? She can't afford this place without your contribution, and finding someone to cover 1,400 plus utilities in 5 days is basically impossible. Not my problem anymore, I said, and meant it. She wanted to end our relationship so she could focus on her personal growth. I'm just respecting her decision and giving her space to evolve. Isabelle actually laughed at that, a short bark of genuine amusement that made her whole face change. You're cold, Marcus. I didn't see that coming, but I respect it. She's been treating you like a walking wallet for months and I've been wondering when you'd notice. I noticed, I just wanted to be sure before I acted, I said, taping up a box of books I'd collected over the years, technical manuals mostly and a few novels I actually enjoyed, now I'm sure. Gabriella came home around 6, arms full of shopping bags from stores she definitely couldn't afford on her boutique salary, humming some song I didn't recognize and clearly riding high on whatever fantasy she'd constructed about her newly single life. She stopped dead when she saw the boxes stacked by the door, her smile freezing into something uncertain and slightly panicked. "What's all this?" she asked, setting down her bags carefully like they might detonate. "I'm moving out," I said from the kitchen where I was wrapping glasses in newspaper. "Found a studio across town, moving Friday. You'll have the place to yourself to really focus on your authentic journey." Her mouth opened and closed a few times, her brain clearly trying to catch up with this reality she hadn't anticipated. "Moving out, but we just talked about this yesterday. We agreed to stay close and keep things normal until the lease ends." "We are staying close," I assured her, "super close, just not cohabitating close. That seemed like it might complicate your growth trajectory, so I'm removing that obstacle for you." "Marcus, you can't just leave me with this whole place," she said, her voice climbing toward panic. "The rent is $2,800 a month plus utilities. I can't cover that on my own." "You'll need to find a roommate," I suggested helpfully, "or maybe 2 roommates. Isabelle only pays $600, so there's definitely room in the budget for another person if you adjust the space allocation." "But that takes time," she protested. "I can't just find someone responsible in 5 days. This isn't fair." "I'm being completely fair," I said, meeting her eyes directly. "I'm covering my contractual obligations exactly as required, 30 days notice and my portion of expenses through the current billing cycle. After that you're free to structure your living situation however works best for your personal brand development." She stared at me like I'd grown a second head, clearly struggling to reconcile this version of me with the accommodating guy who'd spent 3 years making her life easier. "You're doing this to punish me," she said finally, "because I was honest about my needs and ended things instead of stringing you along." "I'm doing this because you ended our relationship," I corrected her. "You wanted to realign your life and I'm realigning mine. We're both just pursuing our individual growth trajectories now." The therapy language thrown back at her made her flinch, and I watched her cycle through several emotions before landing on anger. "This is such bullshit, Marcus," she snapped. "You know I can't afford this place alone. You're being deliberately cruel because your ego is hurt." "My ego is fine," I said calmly, continuing to pack. "You made a choice about what you wanted our relationship to be. I'm respecting that choice and acting accordingly. We can absolutely stay close, but close doesn't mean financially entangled." Over the next 72 hours, Gabriella deployed every manipulation technique she'd ever learned, starting with tears and wounded confusion about how I could be so heartless. She cornered me Wednesday night while I was packing up my tools from the storage closet, mascara running down her face in dramatic streaks. "I thought you loved me," she sobbed. "I thought what we had meant something to you. How can you just walk away like none of it mattered?" "It did matter," I said, handing her a tissue from the box I'd learned to keep nearby during our relationship. "It mattered right up until you decided it didn't matter anymore. Now I'm adjusting my expectations to match yours." "That's not what I meant," she insisted. "I just needed us to evolve into something different, something less conventional and more spiritually aligned." "Gabriella," I said, stopping my packing to look at her directly, "you broke up with me because I don't support your influencer dreams the way you wanted. That's your right, but you don't get to break up with me and still keep all the benefits of having a boyfriend who pays most of your bills." "I never said you had to pay my bills," she shot back, suddenly defensive. "You offered to help because you cared about me." "I offered to contribute to our shared household when we were building a life together," I corrected. "Now we're not building anything together, so my contributions are ending. That's how breakups work." Thursday she switched tactics to nostalgia and guilt, spending the morning digging through photos on her phone and reminiscing loudly about our first vacation together to the Keys. "Remember how perfect that weekend was. Remember how happy we were before everything got complicated. I remember I paid for that entire trip, including the resort you insisted on because it was more photogenic," I said, loading boxes into my truck. "And I remember you spent most of the weekend taking pictures for your Instagram instead of actually enjoying the beach." "You're being deliberately hurtful," she accused, twisting everything good we had into something transactional. "You made it transactional," I said, "when you decided to keep me around for practical support while removing any romantic obligation. I'm just declining the new terms you offered." By Friday morning she'd moved into full crisis mode, following me from room to room while I did my final sweep, alternating between begging and threats. "What am I supposed to tell people?" she demanded. "How am I supposed to explain that you abandoned me right after I was vulnerable enough to share my truth with you?" "Tell them you broke up with your boyfriend and he moved out," I suggested, loading the last box. "That's literally what happened, no explanation needed." You're going to regret this, she said, voice shaking with genuine emotion. You're throwing away 3 years because you're too stubborn to grow with me. I'm not throwing anything away, I said, grabbing my keys and taking one last look around the place I'd called home for 18 months. You already threw it away when you delivered your prepared speech about alignment and authenticity. I'm just respecting your decision. Isabelle appeared in her doorway as I was leaving, gave me a small wave and a knowing smile that suggested she understood exactly what I was doing and approved completely. Gabriella stood in the middle of the living room surrounded by her shopping bags and ring lights and vision boards, looking smaller somehow and genuinely shocked that her plan had backfired so spectacularly. We're still close though, right? She called after me, her voice desperate and uncertain. You'll still answer if I need to talk to you. Absolutely, I said over my shoulder. Super close, we'll definitely stay connected, and I meant every word because staying close was going to teach her exactly what she'd lost. The studio apartment was everything the condo wasn't, small and practical and completely mine without anyone else's vision boards cluttering the walls or ring lights taking up outlet space. I spent the weekend setting up my place exactly how I wanted it, no compromises or negotiations about aesthetics, just functional furniture and a decent coffee maker and silence that felt like luxury after months of Gabriella's constant content creation noise. Monday afternoon my phone started buzzing with the first emergency, Gabriella's contact photo lighting up my screen with that pouty selfie she'd taken specifically for moments when she wanted something. Marcus, oh my god, I need your help so bad. My laptop completely died and I have this huge presentation for a potential brand partnership tomorrow morning and all my files are on there and I'm absolutely panicking. That sucks, I texted back, keeping my tone sympathetic and supportive. Have you tried the Apple Store? They have same-day appointments if you book early enough. I can't afford the Apple Store right now, she responded immediately, and you always knew how to fix computer stuff. Couldn't you just come over real quick and take a look? It would take you like 20 minutes. I'm actually at the garage until 8 tonight, I replied, but the Genius Bar techs are really good at data recovery. I definitely recommend scheduling with them. They're your best bet for a quick turnaround. Marcus, please, came her next message. You know how important this partnership could be for my platform growth? I really need you right now. And I really believe in your ability to handle this independently, I wrote back. You've got this. The Apple Store on Kennedy Boulevard opens at 10. Very supportive, very encouraging, absolutely zero practical assistance. She called instead of texting, her voice tight with frustration when I answered. Why are you being like this? You've helped me with tech problems 100 times before and now suddenly you're too busy. We're close friends now instead of partners, I explained patiently, and close friends encourage each other to develop problem-solving skills rather than creating dependency. I'm supporting your growth by believing you can handle this yourself. That's complete bullshit and you know it, she snapped. You're just being petty because I ended things. I'm being exactly what you asked me to be, I said, close but not romantically entangled, friends who care about each other but maintain healthy boundaries. This is what that looks like. She hung up on me, but I noticed she figured out the Apple Store situation because her Instagram story the next day showed her at some coffee shop with her laptop working, captioned something about overcoming obstacles and manifesting solutions. The requests kept coming with impressive frequency, each one revealing just how much practical support I'd been providing without really noticing the pattern. Wednesday she needed help moving furniture because she was rearranging her room for better natural lighting in her content. I suggested hiring college students off TaskRabbit. Friday her car made a weird noise and she wanted me to check it out. I recommended 3 mechanics in her area with excellent Google reviews. Sunday she was locked out of her streaming accounts and couldn't remember her passwords. I walked her through the password recovery process over text instead of just doing it for her like I used to. Each crisis got met with the same energy, supportive language and genuine encouragement wrapped around absolutely no tangible help, and I could feel her frustration building with every friendly suggestion I offered. The dog sitting request came 2 weeks after I moved out, Gabriella calling on a Thursday evening with that particular tone she used when she was about to ask for something big. So I have this amazing opportunity to go to this influencer retreat in Savannah this weekend, she started, her voice bright with forced casualness. It's like really important networking and content collaboration stuff. That sounds great, I said, genuinely happy she was pursuing her goals. Those kinds of events can be really valuable for building connections. Yeah, exactly, she agreed quickly, seizing on my supportive tone. The only problem is I need someone to watch Winston and my usual pet sitter is booked, so I was hoping you could take him for the weekend like you used to. Winston was Gabriella's high-maintenance poodle who required specific food prepared at specific times, needed 3 walks daily at specific intervals, and had anxiety issues that meant he couldn't be left alone for more than 4 hours without destroying something expensive. I'd spent countless weekends managing Winston's neurotic needs while Gabriella went out, never really questioning it because that's what boyfriends did. I can't this weekend, I said. I've got a full schedule at the garage plus I'm planning to repaint the studio. Marcus, come on. Her voice shifted toward pleading. You love Winston and he loves you. It's just 2 nights and I'll totally owe you one. Have you checked Rover? I asked. They have amazing professional pet sitters who specialize in high-energy dogs. I can send you some links to highly rated ones in your area. I don't want a stranger watching my baby, she protested. Winston knows you and trusts you. Why are you making this so difficult? Because we're close friends now, I reminded her, and friends respect each other's boundaries and time. I'm sure you can find excellent professional care for Winston. There's this great service called WAG that does drop-in visits if you don't want overnight boarding. You're seriously going to make me pay someone when you could just help me out, she said, her voice rising with indignation. I thought you cared about me. I do care about you, I assured her, which is why I'm encouraging you to establish sustainable solutions that don't depend on other people's availability. That's what caring friends do. She went to Savannah without Winston, ended up paying Isabelle an extra $100 to check on him twice a day, and posted stories about how hard it was to find reliable help these days, clearly directed at me. The pattern continued for weeks, every request getting the same treatment, enthusiastic emotional support combined with practical suggestions that required her to actually solve her own problems. When her credit card got declined at a restaurant while she was on a date, she called me from the bathroom in full panic mode. Marcus, I need you to Venmo me like $200 right now. My card isn't working and I'm on this really important date with someone who might invest in my content platform and I'm literally dying of embarrassment. That's really stressful, I sympathized. Have you tried calling your bank's customer service line? They can usually sort out authorization issues pretty quickly. I can't call them from the bathroom at a restaurant, she hissed. I just need you to send me money and I'll pay you back next week, I promise. I don't lend money to friends, I explained gently. It creates weird power dynamics that damage relationships, but your bank should have a 24-hour line you can call, or maybe your date would understand if you explain the situation. Marcus, please, she begged, her voice breaking. I really need you right now, just this once. Close friends encourage financial independence and responsibility, I said, maintaining my supportive tone. I really believe you can navigate this yourself. Maybe the restaurant takes Venmo or Cash App directly. She ended up having her date cover the bill, which apparently ruined the professional dynamic she'd been trying to establish, and she sent me a long text afterward about how I'd sabotaged her potential business opportunity by refusing to be there for her in a moment of crisis. I responded with encouragement about how she'd successfully resolved the situation independently and how proud I was of her problem-solving skills, which made her block my number for 3 days before unblocking it when she needed something else. Isabelle sent me a text one night after an especially dramatic afternoon at the condo. Your ex just spent 20 minutes ranting about how you've changed and become cold and unsupportive. I didn't have the heart to tell her you're literally just treating her how she treated everyone else for years. The irony isn't lost on me, I wrote back. She wanted closeness without obligation. Turns out that's exactly what she's getting. It's beautiful to watch, honestly, Isabelle replied, like some kind of social experiment in consequences. She keeps expecting you to crack and go back to fixing everything for her. I'm not cracking, I said, and I meant it. I'd never felt more certain about a decision in my life. Every time Gabriella reached out expecting me to drop everything and solve her problems, I felt more relief that I'd gotten out when I did. This was what close looked like when it wasn't a manipulation tactic, supportive but boundaried, caring but not responsible, present but not available. 3 weeks after I moved out, Isabelle texted me at 11 on a Saturday night with a message that pulled me away from the transmission rebuild I'd been working on in my new garage space. Winston escaped while G was out somewhere. Pretty sure he's headed toward the park near your old place. You know his favorite spots better than anyone. Any chance you could help me look? I was there in 15 minutes. finding Isabelle standing under a streetlight wearing her scrubs and looking exhausted from what had probably been another brutal shift at the hospital. She'd gone straight from work to searching for this neurotic poodle instead of collapsing into bed like she deserved. "Thanks for coming," she said, genuine relief in her voice. "I've been walking around calling him for 40 minutes and I have to be back at the hospital in like 9 hours. "Where's Gabriella?" I asked, checking the time and noting it was way past when she usually went out. "Your guess is as good as mine," Isabelle said with a shrug. She left around 7 saying she had drinks with potential collaborators, didn't mention anything about Winston getting out. I only noticed because I heard him barking in the hallway when I got home at 10:30. We split up and searched the neighborhood systematically, me checking all of Winston's usual spots from when I used to walk him, the corner of the park where he liked to dig, the bushes near the coffee shop where people dropped food, the alley behind the Italian restaurant where he'd once found half a meatball. Found him 20 minutes later near the fountain, matted and muddy and clearly pleased with himself, completely unbothered by the chaos he'd caused. Isabelle met me back at her car, laughing when she saw the state Winston was in, her whole face transforming from exhausted to genuinely amused. "He looks so proud of himself," she said, taking the leash from me, like he just completed some epic adventure instead of giving everyone a heart attack. "That's Winston," I agreed, watching her crouch down to check him over for injuries with the practiced efficiency of someone used to assessing damage. He's got main character energy without any of the self-awareness. We ended up at a 24-hour diner because Isabelle admitted she hadn't eaten since her lunch break 12 hours ago and I'd skipped dinner to work on the transmission. Sat in a booth with terrible coffee and surprisingly good pancakes while Winston dried off in her car, and for the first time I really saw Isabelle as a person instead of just Gabriella's quiet roommate who worked nights and stayed out of drama. She'd been living in that converted den for almost a year, paying her rent on time and keeping to herself while Gabriella created chaos in the common areas, and I realized I'd never actually had a real conversation with her. "How do you deal with living with her?" I asked, genuine curiosity in my voice. "I lasted 18 months and barely survived." "Noise-canceling headphones and the knowledge that I'm saving 70% of my income to buy my own place," Isabelle said, taking a long drink of coffee. "She's exhausting but the rent is cheap and I'm working doubles anyway so I'm barely there." "You're saving to buy, that's ambitious," I said, impressed because Tampa real estate wasn't exactly affordable. "I've been teaching myself about investment properties online," she explained, watching videos about property assessment and rental income potential. "My plan is to buy a duplex and live in one unit while renting the other, build equity while someone else pays my mortgage." "That's actually brilliant," I said, and meant it. Way smarter than most people's approach to homeownership. She smiled at that, a real smile that reached her eyes and made her look less tired. Coming from someone who owns his own business that means something, most people think I'm crazy for working as much as I do but they don't understand compound interest and equity building. We started talking about the mechanics of property investment, me explaining what to look for in foundation issues and electrical systems, her sharing insights about reading people and assessing situations from her ER experience. The conversation flowed easier than any I'd had with Gabriella in the last year. No performance or agenda, just two people who actually listened to each other and valued what the other brought to the discussion. "I should probably get Winston back," Isabelle said eventually, glancing at her phone. "It's almost 1 and I need at least 5 hours of sleep before my next shift." "I'll follow you back," I offered. "Make sure he gets inside okay." We drove in separate cars through empty Tampa streets, and when we got to the condo Gabriella still wasn't home, all the lights off except the one Isabelle had left on. "You want to come up for a minute?" Isabelle asked, her tone casual but with something underneath that suggested she wasn't ready for the conversation to end. "I've got decent coffee and it's definitely better than that diner sludge." I followed her upstairs with Winston between us, and her room was exactly what I expected, small but organized efficiently, nursing textbooks stacked neatly next to real estate investment guides, a bulletin board covered in property listings and financial calculations. We ended up talking until 3 in the morning, sprawled on her floor with actual good coffee and Winston asleep between us, discussing everything from her goals of owning 5 rental properties by 40 to my plans of expanding the garage into a full-service fleet maintenance operation. She told me about growing up with parents who valued stability over dreams and how she'd learned to want both, to build security while still reaching for something bigger. I told her about starting the garage with nothing but student loans and determination, about the satisfaction of building something real with my own hands instead of chasing some influencer fantasy. Somewhere around 2:30 she mentioned how strange it was watching Gabriella treat me like a resource dispenser, how she'd wanted to say something but figured it wasn't her place. I saw you covering her rent month after month, Isabelle said quietly, watching me over the rim of her coffee mug, saw how she'd ask you for money while posting about luxury lifestyle and self-made success. It made me angry on your behalf. Why didn't you say anything? I asked, curious but not accusatory. Because people don't listen until they're ready to hear it, she said with the wisdom of someone who'd watched a lot of people make preventable mistakes, and because I was honestly impressed by how long you lasted before you snapped. I didn't snap, I corrected. I made a calculated decision based on new information about how she viewed our relationship. She laughed at that, the same genuine sound from earlier at the diner. That's the most engineer approach to a breakup I've ever heard, calculated decision based on new information. I'm a mechanic, not an engineer, I protested, but yeah, once I saw the pattern I couldn't unsee it. We started texting after that night. Nothing dramatic, just updates about our days and shared observations about life. She'd send me photos of properties she was considering with questions about structural concerns. I'd ask her advice about reading difficult customers at the garage. The conversations evolved naturally into coffee meetups on her days off, then lunch when our schedules aligned, then longer hangouts that felt less like appointments and more like something we both looked forward to. Isabelle had this way of seeing through surface-level nonsense that reminded me why I'd been attracted to authenticity in the first place, before Gabriella had made me question whether caring about real things made me boring. A month after the Winston incident, I had her stop by the garage to look at a property she was serious about buying, wanted my opinion on the workshop space in the converted garage. She showed up in jeans and a t-shirt instead of scrubs, hair down instead of pulled back, and I noticed for the first time that she was actually beautiful in this understated way that didn't require ring lights or filters. We spent 2 hours going through that property, me pointing out foundation cracks and outdated electrical while she calculated renovation costs and potential rental income, working together like we'd been doing this for years. Afterward, we grabbed lunch at this taco place near the garage, sitting outside in the Florida sun and talking about her offer strategy. "You're really good at this," she said, gesturing with her taco, "the property assessment thing. You should consider doing consultation work on the side." "You're really good at the investment analysis," I countered. "You've thought through angles most first-time buyers never consider." "We're a good team," she said, then paused like she'd surprised herself with the observation. "We are," I agreed, and felt something shift in the air between us, something that had probably been building since that first night searching for Winston but was only now becoming undeniable. She had salsa on her chin and I reached over without thinking to wipe it off, and the moment my hand touched her face everything stopped, her eyes meeting mine with this expression that was half surprise and half recognition. When I kissed her it felt like the most natural thing in the world, like something that had been inevitable since we'd started actually seeing each other instead of just existing in the same orbit. She kissed me back without hesitation, tasting like lime and salt and something sweet, and when we finally pulled apart she was smiling in a way that made my chest feel tight. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," I admitted, "but I wasn't sure if you felt the same way." "I definitely feel the same way," she said, her hand still resting on my arm. "I just wasn't sure if you were ready after everything with Gabriella." "Gabriella was a lesson in what I don't want," I said honestly. "You're everything I didn't know I was looking for." We kept it quiet for a while, not hiding exactly but not advertising either, both of us wanting to build something real before subjecting it to outside commentary or Gabriella's inevitable drama. Isabelle would come to the garage during my late nights, bringing food and helping with paperwork while I worked on engines, and I'd meet her after her overnight shifts with coffee and breakfast, giving her someone to decompress with before she tried to sleep. It was easy in a way nothing with Gabriella had ever been. Two people who pulled equal weight and actually enjoyed each other's company beyond what the other could provide. The chemistry wasn't just physical, though that was definitely there, it was intellectual and emotional and rooted in genuine respect for who the other person was underneath all the surface-level stuff. We spent weekends looking at properties together, her making offers while I assessed structural integrity, and evenings cooking together in my studio, taking turns choosing recipes and sharing the cleanup. She introduced me to her golden retriever Copper, who she'd been boarding with her parents, and watching her play with him in the park made me understand what partnership was supposed to look like: two whole people choosing to build something together instead of one person propping up another's fantasy. This was what I'd thought I had with Gabriella before I realized I was the only one actually building anything, and the contrast made me grateful for every boundary I'd maintained and every helpful suggestion I'd offered instead of solving her problems. Because if I'd caved and gone back to being her safety net, I never would have found this. The roommate situation deteriorated faster than even Isabelle predicted, starting with Gabriella's increasingly desperate attempts to find someone to cover my $1,400 monthly contribution before the landlord started asking questions about her ability to pay. She'd posted the room on every platform possible, marketing it with the same energy she put into her lifestyle content, emphasizing the prime location and modern amenities while carefully avoiding mention of her tendency to monopolize common spaces for photo shoots or the way she expected roommates to work around her content creation schedule. The first few candidates took one look at her ring light setup in the living room and the vision boards covering the kitchen wall and politely declined, sensing the chaos underneath the curated aesthetic. Then Kirk responded, a 31-year-old insurance adjuster who just finalized his divorce and needed a place quickly, willing to pay first and last month upfront without much negotiation. Isabelle texted me the night Gabriella showed him the room. New roommate incoming. Seems normal enough on the surface, but my instincts are telling me this is going to be a disaster. He's got that desperate energy that makes bad decisions. Trust your instincts, I wrote back. They're usually right about people. Kirk moved in on a Tuesday, arriving with a reasonable amount of furniture and what seemed like a professional demeanor, shaking hands with both Gabriella and Isabelle and making appropriate comments about respecting shared spaces. Gabriella was thrilled, posting stories about her new living situation and how everything was working out perfectly, clearly directed at me as proof she didn't need my financial support after all. The facade lasted exactly 11 days. Isabelle's first complaint came via text at 2 in the morning on a Thursday. Your ex's new roommate is playing video games at full volume, and when I asked him to turn it down he told me he pays rent so he can do what he wants. I have a 12-hour shift starting at 6 and I'm going to murder someone. I called her instead of texting back, hearing the exhaustion and frustration in her voice when she answered. He's been doing this every night this week, she said, stays up until 4 playing some war game with his headset mic on, so he's literally screaming at strangers while I'm trying to sleep, and Gabriella won't say anything because she's terrified he'll leave. Want me to come over? I offered, not to confront him but just so you're not dealing with this alone. No, she sighed, I'm handling it, just needed to vent to someone who gets how ridiculous this is. I'll sleep at the hospital between shifts if I have to. By week 3 Kirk had transformed the living room into his personal disaster zone, gaming equipment spreading across every surface, empty energy drink cans collecting on the coffee table, takeout containers creating an archaeological record of his eating habits. He'd also developed a habit of leaving passive-aggressive notes about household issues, complaining about noise from Isabelle's morning routine when she came home from night shifts, about Gabriella's bathroom products taking up too much space, about the thermostat being set wrong for optimal comfort. Meanwhile, his own portion of utilities remained mysteriously unpaid, Kirk claiming his direct deposit was delayed or his bank had flagged a transaction, always with a reasonable excuse that bought him another week. Isabelle kept me updated with increasingly absurd details. He started commenting on what I eat, she texted one afternoon, told me I should consider intermittent fasting because it's better for cortisol levels. This from a man who had pizza for breakfast. Gabriella was spiraling too, according to Isabelle's reports, caught between needing Kirk's rent money and hating every aspect of his actual presence, unable to create content in her own living room because he refused to move his gaming setup during her prime lighting hours. She's been crying to me about how hard it is to find reliable people, Isabelle said during one of our coffee dates. The irony of her complaining to me about someone taking advantage of her living situation is absolutely lost on her. Does she mention me? I asked, curious despite myself. Only constantly, Isabelle said with a wry smile. She keeps bringing up how you'd know how to handle Kirk, how you always made things run smoothly, how she didn't appreciate your stability until it was gone. It's like listening to someone realize they sold their car and now they're mad about having to walk. The explosion came 5 weeks after Kirk moved in, on a Sunday afternoon when Isabelle was finally home and awake during normal hours. She called me laughing so hard she could barely speak. "You need to hear this. Kirk's ex-wife just showed up demanding he return her grandmother's jewelry and their dog. Apparently he took them during the separation and she finally tracked him down." I could hear shouting in the background, a woman's voice raised in righteous anger and Kirk's defensive responses getting louder. "It gets better," Isabelle said, still laughing. "Gabriella tried to mediate and the ex-wife told her to stay out of it because anyone stupid enough to let Kirk move in deserves whatever chaos follows. Now Gabriella's locked in her room and the ex-wife is threatening to call the police." The police did get called, by a neighbor who'd heard the screaming match through the walls, and they showed up to find Kirk's ex-wife on the doorstep with photos of her missing jewelry on her phone and Kirk claiming she was harassing him. The whole thing ended with Kirk agreeing to return the items and the ex-wife leaving with threats about small claims court, but the damage was done. The entire building had witnessed the drama and the landlord had definitely taken notice. Isabelle sent me photos later. The jewelry box Kirk had been forced to hand over, the dog carrier his ex had brought for their schnauzer, Gabriella's face in the background of one shot looking absolutely mortified. "That was the most entertainment I've had in months," Isabelle texted, "worth every second of lost sleep." Gabriella called me that night, her voice smaller than I'd heard it since the breakup. "Marcus, I really need your help with something." "What's going on?" I said, putting her on speaker while I organized my tools. "Kirk's ex-wife situation was really bad and now I'm worried he's going to bail on rent and I can't afford to cover his portion plus mine. Plus the landlord is asking questions about the police visit. I don't know what to do." "That sounds incredibly stressful," I sympathized. "Have you talked to Kirk about your concerns?" "He just keeps saying it's handled and everything's fine but I don't believe him," she said, her words coming faster with rising panic. "What if he leaves and sticks me with his share? What if the landlord decides we're too much trouble and doesn't renew the lease?" "Those are valid concerns," I agreed. "Have you considered talking to the property management about your options?" "Marcus, please," she interrupted, her voice breaking. "I need actual help, not suggestions about who else I should talk to. Couldn't you just come over and help me deal with Kirk? He respected you when you lived here." "Gabriella," I said gently but firmly, "I don't live there anymore and Kirk isn't my problem to manage. You chose him as a roommate so you need to handle the situation you created." "But you're so much better at this stuff than I am," she protested. "You always knew how to handle difficult people and conflict resolution. I'm completely out of my depth here." "Then this is a great opportunity for growth," I said, using her own language against her. "Learning to navigate difficult situations independently is part of personal development. I believe in your ability to figure this out." "You're really not going to help me," she said, disbelief thick in her voice. "I'm helping you by encouraging your autonomy and problem-solving skills," I corrected. "Close friends support each other's growth rather than enabling dependency. You've got this." She hung up without saying goodbye, and Isabelle texted me 10 minutes later saying Gabriella had emerged from her room on a rant about how everyone in her life was useless and unsupportive. 2 days later, Kirk announced he was moving out at the end of the week, not even giving proper notice, just declaring he'd found a better situation and Gabriella could keep his security deposit to cover his final month. Except he'd never paid his portion of utilities for the last 6 weeks, leaving Gabriella responsible for almost $800 in overdue bills plus the full rent for the remaining 3 months of the lease. Isabelle gave her notice that same week, telling Gabriella she'd found a place closer to the hospital with more predictable roommates, which was true, but the real reason was she was moving in with me. We'd been talking about it for weeks, running the numbers and making plans, Isabelle contributing to the rent on my studio until we could close on the duplex she'd been negotiating to buy. Gabriella absolutely lost it when Isabelle told her, accusing her of abandoning ship and leaving her to drown, conveniently forgetting that Isabelle had been a model roommate for over a year while Gabriella created chaos. "You can't leave me like this," Gabriella said according to Isabelle's retelling. "I'll never find someone to replace both you and Kirk in time. This is going to destroy me financially." "I've given you proper notice," Isabelle said calmly. "A full 30 days, which is more than Kirk gave you. You have time to figure something out." "But I thought we were friends," Gabriella tried, going for the guilt angle. "We're friendly roommates," Isabelle corrected. "There's a difference, and I'm not responsible for managing your financial situation." The parallel to my own exit was so perfect it almost felt scripted. Gabriella once again facing the consequences of treating people like resources rather than humans, learning the same lesson twice because she'd refused to understand it the first time. Isabelle and I had been keeping our relationship intentionally quiet for almost 2 months, not hiding exactly but not broadcasting either, both of us wanting to build something solid before exposing it to outside opinions or Gabriella's inevitable meltdown. We'd gotten into a comfortable rhythm, her staying at my place most nights between shifts, both of us saving aggressively for the duplex down payment, cooking together and talking about floor plans and renovation timelines like we'd been doing this for years. It felt adult in a way my relationship with Gabriella never had, two people with actual goals working towards something real instead of one person funding another's fantasy. The reveal happened by accident on a Saturday morning in early June, Isabelle and I walking through the waterfront farmers market holding hands and debating between two different types of tomatoes for the sauce we were planning to make later. She just convinced me that heirloom varieties were worth the extra cost when I heard someone call my name with unmistakable enthusiasm, turning to see Patricia, Gabriella's mother, approaching with a huge smile and open arms. "Marcus, oh my goodness, I haven't seen you in months." She pulled me into a hug that smelled like the same floral perfume she'd worn at every family dinner I'd attended. "How have you been?" "I've been really good, Patricia," I said, genuinely pleased to see her because she'd always been kind to me, introducing Isabelle, who was still holding the tomatoes and looking slightly uncertain about this interaction. "This is Isabelle." Patricia's eyes went from me to Isabelle to our joined hands, and I watched her process the information with the speed of someone who'd raised 3 daughters and could read a situation instantly. "Isabelle," she repeated, extending her hand with warmth that seemed completely genuine, "it's so lovely to meet you. Are you too?" She gestured between us with a knowing smile. "We're together." "Yes," Isabelle said, her voice steady and confident, meeting Patricia's eyes directly. "We've been dating for a couple months now." Patricia's smile grew even wider, pulling Isabelle into a hug that clearly surprised her. "I'm so happy for you both," she said, looking at me with something that seemed like relief and approval. "Marcus, you look happier than I've seen you in a long time." "I feel happier than I've been in a long time," I admitted, and it was true. The difference between now and the last year with Gabriella was like comparing sunrise to permanent overcast. We talked for another 10 minutes, Patricia asking Isabelle about her work with genuine interest and complimenting her practical approach to real estate investment, telling stories about her own experience buying rental properties years ago. The conversation flowed easily, Patricia treating Isabelle like someone worth knowing rather than just her daughter's ex-boyfriend's new girlfriend, and I could see Isabelle relaxing and actually enjoying the interaction. "You two should come to dinner sometime," Patricia said as we were wrapping up. "I make a mean lasagna and I'd love to hear more about your investment plans, Isabelle. I might have some advice from my own landlord days." "We'd love that," Isabelle said, squeezing my hand. "Thank you for being so welcoming." Patricia hugged us both goodbye, then paused and looked at me with an expression that was hard to read. "Marcus, I don't know what happened between you and Gabriella," she said carefully, "but I want you to know that I always thought you were good for her. She seems lost lately and I worry she made a mistake letting you go." "I appreciate that," I said honestly, "but things worked out the way they needed to. I found someone who actually wants to build a life with me instead of just using me as a foundation for hers." Patricia nodded like she understood more than she was saying, gave us one more smile, and headed off to finish her shopping. Isabelle and I looked at each other, both knowing exactly what was about to happen. "That was nice," Isabelle said, "but Gabriella's going to absolutely lose her mind when her mom tells her." "Probably," I agreed, continuing toward the vegetable stand, "but that's not our problem to manage anymore." Patricia called Gabriella that afternoon according to the timeline Isabelle pieced together from the explosion that followed, and apparently spent 20 minutes gushing about the lovely young woman Marcus was dating and asking pointed questions about why her daughter had ended things with such a clearly stable and happy man. The group chat started within an hour, Gabriella creating a thread with about 15 mutual friends and launching into a narrative about betrayal and suspicious timing that would have been impressive if it wasn't so transparently manipulative. "Can't believe Marcus moved on so fast with my own roommate," her first message read. "Guess I really didn't know him at all, so much for the 3 years we spent together meaning anything." I didn't respond because I wasn't in the group chat, But 3 different people forwarded me screenshots within the first hour, everyone apparently wanting me to see how Gabriella was spinning the story. The narrative painted her as the victim of some coordinated betrayal, Isabelle as a snake who'd been plotting since before the breakup, and me as a guy who'd clearly been waiting for an excuse to trade up. It was pure fiction but told with enough emotion that I could see how someone who didn't know the real timeline might believe it. The response from our mutual friends was not what Gabriella expected. Jake, who'd been at my garage multiple times and knew exactly how long I'd been single before Isabelle, responded first with receipts. Marcus moved out in late March and you posted about your newfound freedom the same week, he wrote, attaching screenshots of her own Instagram stories from April showing her on various dates. Pretty sure he's allowed to date someone after you dumped him and spent 2 months broadcasting your single life. Then Sarah, one of Gabriella's own friends from the boutique, added her perspective. Girl, you literally told me you were relieved to be free of him because he was holding you back from better options, she wrote. You don't get to be mad that he found someone who appreciates him. The group chat devolved from there, more people adding their observations about the timeline and Gabriella's own behavior in the months since the breakup. Someone posted a screenshot of her Venmo request to me with captions like, emergency money/petty, and investment piece handbag. Another person mentioned seeing her on dating apps within days of our breakup. A third brought up how she'd been complaining about me being too stable and boring for months before she actually ended things. Emily, who'd been friends with both of us since college, delivered the final blow. Gabriella, you broke up with him because he wouldn't fund your influencer lifestyle, she wrote. You literally told me he wasn't ambitious enough because he was happy running a garage instead of chasing some startup fantasy. You don't get to rewrite history now that he's moved on with someone who values what you rejected. The chat went silent after that, Gabriella apparently realizing that her victim narrative wasn't landing the way she'd planned. She tried one more angle, posting a vague story about fake friends and people showing their true colors, but even that got minimal engagement compared to her usual posts. Isabelle showed me the whole thread that evening while we were cooking dinner, both of us reading through it with a mixture of amusement and secondhand embarrassment. She really thought people would take her side, Isabelle said, stirring the sauce we'd made from those expensive tomatoes, like everyone forgot how she actually treated you. People see more than we think they do, I said, chopping garlic for the bread. They watched her take advantage for years. They're not going to suddenly believe I'm the villain in this story. My phone buzzed with a message from Gabriella herself, the first direct contact we'd had in over a week. I can't believe you're dating Isabelle. You moved on so fast it's like I never mattered to you at all. I stared at the message for a long moment, considering various responses before settling on simple truth. You moved on before we even broke up? I wrote back, I just took longer to make it official. Isabelle and I started dating in May, 2 months after you ended things. You were on dating apps in April. The typing bubble appeared and disappeared several times before her response came through. That was different. I was trying to figure out what I wanted. You were supposed to wait for me. Wait for you to what? I asked. Figure out that everyone else was worse than what you had. I'm not a backup plan, Gabriella. You're being cruel, she wrote, throwing what we had in my face by dating someone I have to see every day. You're being dramatic, I corrected. You ended our relationship. Isabelle and I are both adults who are allowed to date whoever we want. Your feelings about it aren't my responsibility anymore. She didn't respond after that, but Isabelle told me later that Gabriella spent the evening crying loudly in her room, probably hoping someone would come comfort her, but Isabelle had just put in her headphones and kept packing for the move. The social media campaign continued for a few more days, Gabriella posting increasingly desperate content about knowing your worth and not settling for people who don't fight for you, each post getting fewer likes and more eye rolls from people who knew the real story. Patricia called me directly the following Tuesday, apologizing for apparently triggering Gabriella's meltdown and asking if we were still interested in that dinner invitation. Absolutely, I said. Isabelle would love to hear your landlord stories, and honestly your daughter's reaction isn't your fault or your responsibility. I worry about her, Patricia admitted, her voice heavy with the particular exhaustion of a parent watching their adult child make preventable mistakes. She's always been so focused on appearance over substance. I'd hoped you were helping her see things differently, but I think she just resented you for it. Some people have to learn the hard way, I said, watching Isabelle organize her books on the shelf we just installed. All you can do is let her figure it out and be there when she's ready to grow. You're more generous than she deserves, Patricia said, but that's probably why Isabelle is lucky to have you. We're lucky to have each other, I corrected, and meant it more than I'd meant almost anything. Kirk disappeared 2 weeks after Isabelle gave her notice, leaving behind a room full of trash and unpaid bills and absolutely no forwarding information, blocking Gabriella's number and vanishing like he'd never existed except for the financial devastation he left in his wake. Isabelle was still technically living there when it happened, counting down her final days before the move, and she called me from the condo with an update that was equal parts horrifying and satisfying. He's just gone, she said. I can hear Gabriella on the phone with the landlord trying to explain why she can't cover his portion of rent. She's absolutely panicking, and honestly I feel bad for about 3 seconds until I remember how she treated everyone like disposable resources. The math was brutal and entirely of Gabriella's own making. Kirk owed 6 weeks of utilities totaling around $800, plus his final month's rent of $900 that he'd promised to pay before disappearing, and Gabriella was suddenly responsible for the full $2,800 monthly rent with only her boutique salary and whatever she made from her failing influencer career. The landlord gave her 1 week to either pay everything or provide proof of a new roommate who could cover the shortfall, and based on Isabelle's reports, Gabriella spent that week in increasingly desperate attempts to find someone willing to move in immediately. She posted ads everywhere with photos that made the place look bigger and brighter than reality, emphasizing location and amenities while carefully cropping out her ring light setup and vision boards. The responses were predictable, people interested until they met her and realized she expected them to work around her content creation schedule and tolerate her treating common spaces like a personal studio, everyone politely declining after the initial tour. By day 5 she'd lowered her standards considerably, offering the room to a college student who wanted to throw parties, to someone's cousin who had 3 cats despite the no pets policy, to basically anyone who could pay rent regardless of whether they'd be a functional roommate. Isabelle moved out on schedule, loading her belongings into a truck I'd rented while Gabriella watched from the window with an expression somewhere between betrayal and desperation. She came downstairs as we were loading the last boxes, wrapped in a blanket despite the Florida heat, looking smaller and more defeated than I'd ever seen her. You're really leaving, she said to Isabelle, voice hollow, even after everything we've been through living together. We've been roommates, Isabelle corrected gently but firmly, and I gave you proper notice. This isn't personal, it's just practical. Gabriella's eyes shifted to me, standing by the truck in my work clothes, and something like realization crossed her face. You planned this, she said, the accusation week because she didn't really believe it. You two got together just to punish me. We got together because we have compatible values and actually enjoy each other's company. I said, your situation right now is the result of your own choices. Kirk was your decision. Pushing away people who actually cared about you was your decision. Treating relationships like transactions was your decision. She flinched like I'd hit her, tears starting to stream down her face, the real kind, not the performative ones she used to deploy strategically. I made mistakes, she whispered. I know I did. I took you for granted and treated you badly, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I believe you're sorry, I said, and I meant it because she clearly was, but you're sorry because you're facing consequences, not because you actually understand what you did wrong. That's not fair, she protested weakly. It's completely fair, Isabelle interjected, stepping in with the directness she'd learned from years of delivering hard truths to patients. You didn't apologize when Marcus was still available to take you back. You're apologizing now that he's happy with someone else and you're stuck with the mess you created. Gabriella looked between us, searching for sympathy or softness or some crack she could exploit, but finding only 2 people who'd learned to value themselves too much to be manipulated. The eviction notice came 3 days later, according to mutual friends who still lived in the building, Gabriella having failed to secure a new roommate or come up with the money to cover the shortfall. She tried one last desperate plea to the landlord, offering to pay partial rent and make up the difference over time, but property management had dealt with enough broken promises to know that pattern never ended well. She had 30 days to vacate, and from what I heard through the grapevine, she spent most of that time cycling between rage and despair, posting bitter content about how hard the world was and how people only cared about money, the irony of her complaints completely lost on her. Patricia called to tell me Gabriella was moving back home, her voice heavy with disappointment and maternal concern. She's devastated, Patricia said, lost her apartment, can't afford to stay in Tampa, the boutique let her go for missing too many shifts, everything's falling apart for her. I'm sorry she's struggling, I said honestly, but these are the natural consequences of her choices, sometimes that's how people learn. Do you think she's learned anything? Patricia asked. The question weighted with hope that her daughter had grown from this experience. I think she's learned that actions have consequences, I said. Whether she's learned why those actions were wrong in the first place, that's something only time will tell. Gabriella left Tampa in mid-July, moving back to her parents' suburban house 2 hours outside the city, posting one final story about taking time to heal and rediscover herself that felt more like surrender than growth. Her influencer accounts went quiet after that, the occasional post lacking the frequency and enthusiasm she'd once maintained, her follower count slowly declining as people realized the content wasn't coming back. Isabelle and I closed on the duplex 3 weeks later, a solid property in a good neighborhood with a tenant already in place in the second unit covering half our mortgage. We spent our weekends renovating our side, Isabelle painting while I handled the structural repairs, Copper the golden retriever supervising from his bed in the corner and occasionally inspecting our progress. This is what partnership looks like, Isabelle said one evening while we were installing new kitchen cabinets together, both of us covered in sawdust and completely content, two people building something real instead of one person propping up another's fantasy. We had Patricia over for that promised dinner once we'd gotten the place livable, her bringing wine and genuine enthusiasm for what we'd created. She looked around at the space we'd transformed together, at the evidence of our combined effort and shared vision, and smiled with something that looked like relief. This is what I wished for Gabriella, she said, someone to build with instead of someone to use, but she couldn't see it when she had it. Some people need to lose everything before they can appreciate anything, I said, pouring wine into the glasses Isabelle had picked out. Maybe this will be her catalyst for actual growth. I hope so, Patricia said, but regardless of what she learns, I'm glad you found this. Gesturing between Isabelle and me, you both deserve partners who value what you bring. The garage expanded over the following months, my reputation growing as I took on fleet maintenance contracts that required the kind of reliable service I'd built my business on. Isabelle's rental income from the other unit exceeded projections, her investment strategy proving as solid as her research had suggested, and we started talking about buying a second property within the year. We built a life that felt sustainable and genuine, two people who showed up equally and celebrated each other's wins without competition or resentment. I ran into one of Gabriella's old coworkers from the boutique about 6 months after she'd left, someone named Ashley who'd always been friendly and seemed genuinely curious about how I was doing. She told me Gabriella was still living with her parents, working retail at the mall near their house and apparently dating someone new, though Ashley wasn't sure how serious it was. She asks about you sometimes, Ashley said, wants to know if you're still with Isabelle, seems shocked that you two are actually happy and building something real. What does she say when people tell her we are? I asked, morbidly curious. She gets quiet, Ashley replied, like she's finally understanding what she lost, but it's too late to matter now. I saw Gabriella exactly once more, about a year after everything fell apart, at a mutual friend's wedding where we'd both been invited before the breakup and neither of us had the relationship to the couple to justify backing out. She was there with some guy who looked young and eager and slightly overwhelmed by her, the same expression I probably wore in our early days before I understood what I was signing up for. She spotted me and Isabelle across the reception, the two of us laughing with the groom's family and clearly comfortable in our own skin, and I watched her face process what she was seeing, the reality that we weren't just dating but actually thriving together. She approached during a lull in the music, the guy she'd brought trailing behind uncertainly. Marcus, she said, her voice carefully neutral, you look really good, happy? I am happy, I said, putting my arm around Isabelle naturally. We both are. How have you been? I'm okay, she said, the lie obvious in how quickly she said it, living with my parents still, working on figuring things out. That's good. Personal growth takes time. I offered, the same supportive but distant energy I'd maintained throughout our entire post-breakup interaction. This is Chad, she said, gesturing to the guy beside her who extended his hand with nervous enthusiasm. We've been dating for a few months. Nice to meet you, Chad, I said, shaking his hand and noticing how Gabriella watched our interaction like she was looking for something specific, some sign that I was bothered or jealous or still affected by her presence. The conversation lasted maybe 5 minutes, surface-level pleasantries that revealed nothing substantial, before Gabriella made an excuse about needing to check her makeup and retreated with Chad following dutifully behind. She wanted you to be jealous, Isabelle observed once they were gone, bringing a new boyfriend to show you she'd moved on, but then she saw that you genuinely don't care and it broke something in her. I do care, I corrected. I care that she's struggling and I hope she figures herself out eventually. I just don't care in the way she wants me to. I'm not pining or regretting or wishing things were different. Later that night as we were driving home, Isabelle asked the question I'd been waiting for. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if she'd been different? If she'd actually valued you the way she should have? No, I said immediately, because if she'd been different she wouldn't have been Gabriella, and if she hadn't dumped me I never would have found you. Everything happened exactly the way it needed to. We pulled into the driveway of our duplex, the porch light glowing warm against the evening dark, Kappa's face visible in the window waiting for us to come home. This was what revenge looked like when you didn't have to orchestrate it, just living well and building something real with someone who chose you as enthusiastically as you chose them. Gabriella had wanted to stay close so she could keep accessing my resources while exploring her options, and I'd given her exactly that. Closeness without utility, support without sacrifice, the appearance of friendship without any of the benefits she'd taken for granted. She'd learned the hard way that you can't demote someone to a supporting role in your life and expect them to keep providing the services of a leading man, that boundaries matter and choices have consequences and some lessons only stick when they cost you everything you took for granted. My revenge wasn't cruelty or calculated punishment. It was simply honoring the exact boundary she'd established and watching her realize too late what she'd actually asked for, finding happiness with someone who saw my value while she struggled with the reality she'd created by treating people like disposable resources instead of human beings worthy of respect. Isabelle squeezed my hand as we walked inside together, both of us knowing without saying that we'd found something Gabriella would never understand, a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection instead of convenience and exploitation, and that was the best possible ending to a story that had started with someone who couldn't see past her own reflection long enough to appreciate what was standing right in front of her.